It is not the kind where a man pulls a pistol and 100 soldiers fall back trembling. I have seen those stories told around campfires, and I have watched grown men believe them, and I have learned to distrust any tale where courage costs the hero nothing. This one cost everything. I was 22 years old when I watched a man stand in front of an army column with empty hands and a bad knee, and ask them plainly to shoot him before they took the woman lying in the dirt behind him. I have spent 40 years trying to forget the look on his face when he said it. I have failed. So I am going to give that memory to you instead. The way you hand a heavy thing to someone younger, hopping their back is stronger than yours has gotten. Read it slow. There's a part near the end of all this where you'll want to look away. Don't, he didn't. The morning it started, I was counting nails. I want that understood, because people who hear this story afterward always imagine I was doing something that mattered. I was not. I was a hired hand on the Pelham spread in the foothills below the Chiricahuas, and on the third Tuesday of that September I was squatting on my heels behind the smokehouse, sorting a coffee can of nails into bent and straight, because Mr. Pelham did not believe in throwing anything away, and neither, by extension, was I allowed to. I keep a tally book, always have. Little leather thing my mother stitched, fits in a shirt pocket, and I write down the day's count of whatever I'm counting: head of cattle, sacks of flour, days till payment, nails. It's a habit folks have made fun of my whole life. Brennan and his book. But I've found that a man who writes things down remembers them honest, and a man who doesn't remembers them, however, flatters him most. So when I tell you what happened, understand it's not just an old man's mouth talking. It's the book talking too. I still have it. The page from that day has a smear of something brown along the bottom edge that I have never had the stomach to scrub at. That morning the page said, 47 straight, 31 bent. Then it said nothing for a long while, because the dust came up on the south road. You learn to read dust out there the way a sailor reads sky. A single rider kicks up a thin, lazy ribbon that hangs and dies. A wagon makes a low, slow boil. But what came up the south road that morning was a wall, flat-topped, brown gold, climbing higher than horses or wagons ought to climb it. And that meant numbers, and numbers in uniform, because nobody else moved through that country in tight enough order to throw dust like a single creature. I stood up. My knees popped. The coffee can went over and I didn't write it. 47 straight nails went into the dirt, and I have never once regretted leaving them there. By the time the column resolved out of its own haze, I could count it, and counting is the one thing I'm good at. Cavalry, 2 columns of 2, maybe 60 riders, a pair of supply wagons behind, canvas lashed and bowed, and behind the wagons, walking, a string of people I did not at first understand I was looking at. They were Apache. Chiricahua, though I didn't have the word for the band then, only learned it later. Maybe 30 of them, mostly women, some old men, a clutch of children walking with the particular careful gait of children who have already learned not to complain. They were roped at the wrists in a line, the rope running soldier to captive, and they walked because the alternative had been explained to them. I had heard the way everybody had heard that it was happening, that the army had decided the whole Chiricahua people were to be loaded onto trains and shipped east Florida. The talk was, some old Spanish fort by the ocean, far as the country could throw them without dropping them in it. Even the ones who'd scouted for the army, even the bobbies. The talk had been the kind of talk you nod at over coffee and then forget, because it was happening somewhere else to someone else, the way the worst things always are until the dust comes up your own south road. I want to be careful here, because 40 years gives a man time to dress up his own decency. So, I did not run down there with a noble heart. I stood behind the smokehouse and I watched, and the loudest thing in my chest was not pity. It was the simple animal relief of a man who is not roped to that line. I am ashamed of it. I am telling you anyway, because the man this story is about did not get to feel that relief, and I think that's the whole difference between him and me. The column stopped at the well. Mr. Pelham had the only good water for 9 miles, and the lieutenant in charge knew it, And so the whole grinding apparatus of removal came to rest in our yard to let horses and prisoners drink. The lieutenant was young, younger than I'd have guessed for the work, with a sunburned neck and a mustache he clearly hoped made him older. He dismounted, slapped dust off his thighs, and called for the rancher. Mr. Pelham went out to him with his hat in his hands and that flat, careful courtesy men used with the army, and I drifted along behind because nobody told me not to, writing in my head, 60 horse, 30 walking, 2 wagons. And then I saw her, and the counting stopped. She was at the end of the rope line, and she was not walking. She was being half carried by an older woman on one side and a girl of maybe 13 on the other, and her feet dragged twin furrows in the dust, and her head hung, and even from 30 paces I could see that something was deeply wrong with her. Her leg below the right knee was bound in filthy rag and a splint of 2 sticks, and the rag had gone the color rags go when the wound under them has turned. She was young, not much older than me, and her face had the gray sheen of a person whose body is spending its last reserves just to keep the lights on inside. When the line halted, she did not stand. She went down. The older woman and the girl tried to keep her up and could not, and she folded into the dust at the lip of our well, and she made a sound I have spent a long time not describing to people, because there isn't a clean way to do it. It was not a scream. It was smaller than that and worse. It was the sound a person makes when even pain has gotten tired. A few soldiers glanced over. One looked away quick the way you do. Most didn't look at all. You can get used to anything. That is the most frightening thing I know about people, and I learned it that morning watching men who were not cruel. I want that understood. They were not, by and large, cruel men. Step over a dying woman to get to water, because the part of them that would have stopped had been walked clean out of them, mile by mile, day by day, until it was gone. That's when the mountain man came down off the ridge. I'd seen him before. Everybody in those hills had seen him, in the way you've seen a particular hawk or a particular bend in a creek, a fixture, more landscape than man. He trapped and traded up in the high country, came down to the settlement maybe twice a year for powder and coffee and salt, and he spoke to nobody he didn't have to. He was old. Not feeble old. He moved like a man who'd never once in his life been told to hurry, but old enough that his beard had gone the gray of wood smoke, and his hands had the swollen knuckles of a lifetime in cold water. The settlement men called him the Mountain Man, or Old Caleb, though I never once heard him called Caleb to his face, and don't to this day know if it was his name or just a name that got stuck to him. He came down the ridge trail on a mule, leading a second mule packed with hides, and he came at his own unhurried pace right up until the moment he saw the rope line. Then he stopped. I was close enough to see his face change, and it did not change the way you'd write it in a story. There was no flash of fury, no jaw setting. What happened was quieter and harder to watch. His face emptied, like a man who has just been told a thing he had spent years arranging his whole life around not being told. He sat his mule and looked down the rope line, and his eyes went along it the way mine had, soldier to captive, and they stopped where mine had stopped on her, folded in the dust at the well, and they stayed. He got down off the mule. He didn't tie it. A man who's lived alone 40 years and he just dropped the lead and let it lie, which tells you, if you know mules, exactly how much was left of his ordinary mind in that moment. He walked toward her. A soldier stepped to cut him off, not rough, just a hand up, hold on there, old timer, and the mountain man went around him like the man was a fence post. Walked right around. Got to the well. Got down on his bad knee in the dirt beside her, and I heard the knee, heard the little grunt it pulled out of him. And he put one of those swollen old hands very lightly on the side of her face. And she opened her eyes. I was maybe 15 feet off by then. I will swear to what I saw. Her eyes opened, and they found his face, and something moved across her ruined gray features that I can only call recognition, and under the recognition, something worse, something that broke my heart clean in two before I even understood it. She looked sorry. as if the worst part of dying for her in that moment was that he had to see it. She said something, low in her own language, 3 or 4 words. He answered her in the same tongue, soft, his mouth close to her ear, and I didn't understand a syllable, and I understood the whole of it anyway, the way you understand a song in a language you don't speak. Then the lieutenant said, "Get him off the prisoner." I should tell you what I did, because it isn't much, and the not muchness of it is part of why I'm an old man giving this story away instead of carrying it lighter. I did nothing. I stood there with my tally book in my hand like a fool, and I did nothing. 2 soldiers moved on the mountain man. They took him under the arms to lift him off her, and he came up off his knee in a way that surprised them. Surprised me, surprised, I think, his own old body fast and turning, so that he came up between the soldiers and the woman, his back to her, facing them, and he spread his arms a little, not like a man fixing to fight, but like a man making himself wide, making himself a wall. "She can't travel," he said. His voice came out cracked from disuse, and he had to say it twice to be heard. "She can't travel. You move her, she dies on the road." "Then she dies on the road," the lieutenant said, not cruelly. "That's the thing I keep circling back to." He said it the way you'd note that it might rain. "My orders are every Chiricahua, every one. I don't get to leave the sick ones, old man. I'd have left half of 'em in the dragoons. Now stand aside. Leave her with me." The mountain man's arms were still spread. "I'll see to her, up the mountain. She's one woman, half dead. You tell 'em you counted her dead. You tell 'em whatever you—" "I don't falsify a count." There it was again, that flat, reasonable horror. "Stand aside, or I'll have you stood aside." And the mountain man said the thing I have spent 40 years failing to forget. He let his arms come down. He looked at that sunburned boy of a lieutenant, and his emptied face had filled back up with something, and what it had filled up with was a kind of terrible calm, and he said, "Then shoot me first. I won't watch you take her, and I won't move, so the only road past me's through me. I'm an old man, it's cheap. Do it before you do her." The yard went quiet. Even the horses seemed to hold off. A child somewhere in the rope line started to cry and was hushed. I had my tally book open. My pencil was on the page, and I realize now, writing this, that what I was doing in that moment, the only thing my useless frozen body could think to do was record it. As if writing the mountain man asked them to shoot him would do one particle of good. As if the book could hold a thing the world was about to break. The lieutenant looked at him a long moment. Then he said, "I don't have time for this," and he drew his sidearm. "I'd like to tell you I moved then. I'd like to tell you my legs finally worked, and I shouted something brave, and the whole thing turned on my courage." What happened was Mr. Pelham spoke. Mr. Pelham, who had stood through all of it with his hat in his hands, who was a hard, small, careful man I'd never once seen put himself between anybody and anything. Mr. Pelham said, in a voice gone strange and high, "Now hold on. Hold on now. There's no need of that on my ground." The lieutenant turned to him, pistol still down at his side, irritated. "Your ground." My ground, my yard." Pelham's hands were shaking on his hat brim, and he kept talking anyway, faster, the words tumbling. "You shoot a white man dead in my yard over an Apache, there's papers in that, there's an inquiry in that. There's questions come down from Tucson land on me, on my spread, and I'll be a year answering 'em. You want that, over one of 'em that's dying anyhow. You shoot her, fine, that's your count, that's nothing to me. But you do not discharge that pistol into a white man on the Pelham spread and make me the one explains it." It was, you understand, a coward's argument, a bookkeeper's argument. There was not one word of mercy in it. It was all liability and paperwork, and not me, not on my ground. I despised it as I heard it, and I have come slowly, over 40 years, to something almost like gratitude for it, because it was the only language that boy in the uniform could hear right then, and it worked, and decency that works is worth more than nobility that doesn't. I've made my peace with that, mostly. The lieutenant stood there with the pistol heavy at the end of his arm. You could see him doing the arithmetic. A year of questions from Tucson, against one dying woman and one mad old trapper. The math the rest of his orders had already taught him to do. He holstered the pistol. "The old man can have her," he said loud to the yard to his sergeant, washing his hands of it. "Mark her down dead in the dragoons. She's no count of mine." A pause. He looked at the mountain man with something that wasn't quite hatred and wasn't quite anything good. "She'll be dead by dark regardless. You've bought yourself a grave to dig, that's all. Congratulations." He gave the order to move out. The rope line groaned back up onto its feet. The wagons creaked. The sergeant came over and cut the woman free of the line with 2 strokes of a knife, rough, like cutting a snared thing loose, and the rope end fell into the dust beside her, and that was that. 30 became 29. A child in the line looked back at her, the 13-year-old girl who'd been half carrying her, being dragged on now by the rope, twisting to keep her eyes on the woman in the dirt. And the woman lifted one hand off the ground, just barely, just an inch, and the girl saw it, and then the line pulled her around a fold of the land and she was gone. That is the part I told you not to look away from, not the pistol, that. The hand lifting an inch and the girl carried off around the hill. I've watched it 10,000 times behind my eyes. I do not know if they were sisters or mother and daughter or nothing kin at all. I never found out. The mountain man knew, I think, but the mountain man and I did not, in the years that followed, ever once speak of it, and there are some doors you don't knock on. When the dust of the column had thinned back to a memory on the South Road, there was just the 4 of us left in the yard. Mr. Pelham still shaking, me with my idiot book, the mountain man on his knees, and the woman. She was alive, just. The lieutenant's prophecy hung over her like the buzzards already starting their slow high wheel. The mountain man looked up from her, and here is the thing. Here is the thing that turned me from a watcher into a part of this story whether I wanted to be or not. He looked up, and his eyes went past Pelham, who he must have known had just saved his life, and they landed on me. On the boy with the book. "You," he said. His voice had gone soft again, the fight out of it, just an old man at the bottom of a thing too big for him. "You got hands. Help me get her up the mountain or she dies in this yard. I can't carry her and ride the knee both." Mr. Pelham started to say something about how I was hired help, about how there was a day's work owed, and then he looked at the woman in the dust and looked at me and stopped, and what he said instead, low, was, "Go on then, Brennan, but you carry your own grief on this. Not mine. You hear, not on my ground." And he turned and walked back to the house and did not come out again. And I want it recorded that for all his cowardice, that was the second decent thing the man did that day. And the more decent of the two, because it cost him a hand he needed for the fall work, and he gave it anyway, looking the other direction. I knelt down in the dust beside her, beside the mountain man, and I got my first close look at the wound on her leg, and my stomach turned all the way over, and I made myself not let it show on my face, because she was watching me with those gray-sheened eyes, taking the measure of this new young stranger who'd be among the last people she ever saw. And I would not, let the last thing she read on a face be disgust. I looked at her instead. I looked her right in the eye and I tried to put on my face the only true thing I had, which was, I am here. For whatever it's worth, and it may be worth nothing, I am here and I am not stepping over you. She looked back at me a long moment. And then, I swear this on the book, she made a sound that was almost a laugh, a breath of one. Like even now, even there, something in her had found the situation absurd. The trembling rancher gone to ground, the mad old trapper, the boy with the notebook, all of them gathered uselessly around her ruin. As if she'd seen the whole machine of the world try to grind her up, and had now been handed, at the end, this small, ridiculous mercy of 3 half-broken men, and the only honest response her body had left was that ghost of a laugh. I have built a good part of my life around that laugh. I have tried, when things were at their blackest for me, and they have been black, to find the thread of it, the absurd thread, the part of any catastrophe that a person could, if they were strong enough, breathe a laugh at. I am not strong enough. She was. With a rotting leg and an inch of life left, and her people roped off around the hill, she was stronger than I have ever managed to be on my best day, and she spent some of that last strength on a joke nobody told. We got her up between us. The mountain man took the bulk of her weight on his good side, and I took her legs, careful, so careful of the bad one, and she bit down on her own sound and led us, and we started for the high country with the buzzards turning patient overhead, and the sun climbing toward a noon that promised nothing. I did not know her name yet. I did not know the mountain man's true name, or how he knew her, or what road of years had wound the two of them together long before that morning at the well. I did not know that I'd spend the next 11 days on that mountain, or what I'd see there, or that I would come down a different man than the one who climbed up. I knew only what the book knew. So that night, by the first fire we built outside his cabin, while he worked over her leg with hands that shook and a jaw that didn't, I took out the little leather book my mother stitched, and under 47 straight, 31 bent, I wrote the truest sentence I had. The first thing you should know about the 11 days is that the lieutenant was wrong. She did not die by dark. She did not die the second day, when the fever climbed so high she spoke for hours to people who weren't there, long unspooling streams of her own language, soft and urgent, nomming names into the cabin's dark corners. She did not die the fourth day, the worst day, the day the mountain man did the thing to her leg that I will get to and would rather not. She did not die at all on that mountain, and I have come to believe she was the only one of the four of us up there who, from the very first hour, had decided she wouldn't. I want to put that down plain because the way these stories usually run, the dying woman is a sort of weight the men carry, a thing to be saved, a reason for the men to be noble at. And for the first day or so, I confess I saw her that way too, as cargo, as the object of the mountain man's strange grief. It took me until about the third night to understand I had it exactly backward. We weren't carrying her. She was, by some furious arithmetic of will I'll never understand, carrying us. All three of us, up that mountain and through what came after. But I'm ahead of the book again. Let me go back to the first night. The cabin sat in a fold of the high country where a spring came out of the rock, and it was the work of a careful man, I'll give him that. You could read his whole solitary character in the place. Everything had its nail, hides stretched and scraped, a stack of split wood squared off like masonry, 2 traps hung oiled by the door, and a third, I'd learn, kept apart from the others on a separate peg never used that I never did get the story of. A single chair. 1 cup, 1 bowl, 1 spoon, worn down on one side from 40 years of the same hand. He had no place to put her, is what I'm getting at. A man builds a life that careful around the number 1. There's no slot in it for a second body, let alone a dying one. And I watched him, that first night, simply unmake it. He took his own bedshelf apart and rebuilt it lower and wider by firelight so she could lie flat and we could get at the leg from both sides. He cut up a hide he'd have traded for good money in the spring and made her a pad of it. He gave her the 1 cup. By the time the moon was up, he'd dismantled the geometry of 40 years of solitude without one word of complaint, the way some men pray, and I understood I was watching something I had no name for and have only since found the edges of. I asked him her name that first night. It seemed a small enough thing. He was a long time answering. So long I thought he wouldn't. He was working a paste of something. I never knew the half of what he put in his medicines, roots and a gray moss and the inner bark of something, and once, God help me, the contents of a wasp gall, and he worked it in a little stone bowl with the heel of his hand and didn't look up. Nainjud, he said finally, or near to it. I'm spelling it the way my ear caught it, and my ear was a white boy's ear, so don't trust me on it. Means, and he stopped, and his hand stopped on the bowl, and that emptying came across his face again, the one from the yard. Means something like she carries it back, like a thing that was took and she's the one brings it home, her grandmother's name, old name. He started grinding again. I called her Nan, just Nan, she never minded it. I called her, Past tense, present woman lying right there breathing. I noticed it and I didn't ask. The third decent thing I'd managed that whole week may be knowing when not to knock. I wrote it in the book that night by the fire. Her name is Nan. He won't say how he knows her. Then under it, because I'm a man who needs the count to balance and it wouldn't, he took apart his own bed for her. A man does not do that for a stranger. The fever talk on the second day was the hardest sound I've ever sat with. That wasn't a person screaming. She wasn't in pain, that was almost worse. She was somewhere else, somewhere the fever had carried her, and from the way she talked, the rises and falls, the little laughs, the way her hands moved on the hide, she was somewhere full of people. Somewhere good. She'd say a name and wait, head tilted like she was hearing the answer. She'd reach up and pat the air gently, the way you settle a child. Once she sang a few bars of something, 3 notes, over and over, a lullaby's shape to it, and the mountain man across the cabin, mending a strap, went absolutely still and stayed still until she stopped. I said low, "Who's she talking to?" And he said, not looking up from the strap, "Her dead. The fever opens the door, she's visiting." And then, after a while, in a voice that had gone down to almost nothing, "There's a lot of 'em to visit now." That was the closest he came those first days to telling me anything. There's a lot of them to visit now. I let it sit. I have spent 40 years filling in around that sentence, and I've never been sure of the picture, only the size of it. I made myself useful with the things I could do. I hauled water from the spring. I split wood badly at first, the mountain man watching with an expression that on a less grim man would have been amusement, then better, my hands learning the swing. I cooked what there was to cook, which wasn't much, and I shot a brace of quail the 5th day with his old rifle and felt, when I brought them in, a stupid swell of pride entirely out of scale with 2 small birds, because they were the first thing I'd contributed that he hadn't had to fix after me. He nodded at the quail, just a nod. I wrote it in the book like it was a wage. 2 quail, he nodded. You take your pay where you find it. The 4th day. I'll tell it quick because she deserves it told, and I deserve to have to tell it. The wound had gone the way wounds go when the body decides to wall off the rot, by giving up the ground around it. The leg below the knee was past saving, and the rot was making for the knee, for the thigh, for the rest of her, and the mountain man knew it. And he knew what knowing it meant. And on the morning of the 4th day, he came and stood over her a long time with his oiled traps hanging on the wall behind him and his one good knife in his hand. And his face was the face of a man at the bottom of the only well there is. He said to me, "I've done it on a man once, pinned in a rock fall, no other way down off the mountain alive, done it on plenty of beasts." He turned the knife over. "I have never wanted to be wrong about a thing the way I want to be wrong about this." I said, and I was 22 and my voice shook, "Is there no other?" "No," flat, then softer. "No, I'm sorry, boy, I'd give a year off my own life to make there be. There isn't." He looked at her. She was awake, she'd surfaced from the fever that morning, lucid. Gray, watching us with those eyes that always seemed to be 1/2 step ahead of whatever the men were about to fumble toward. And it's not mine to decide. It's hers. And here is the thing, I came up that mountain not knowing and came down knowing. He asked her. He got down on his bad knee beside her, the knee that cost him every time, and he used it for her every time without a sound. And he spoke to her low in her own tongue, and he held up the knife so she'd understand the whole of what he was asking, and he did not soften it. I could tell he didn't soften it from how long he talked and how her face changed as he talked. From gray blank to something that gathered, slowly, into comprehension, and then into the kind of grief that has no theatrics left in it. Just water sliding sideways off the bridge of the nose because the head's lying flat. She was quiet a moment, the fire ticked. Then she lifted her hand, the same hand, I thought, the same one that had lifted an inch in the yard, and she put it flat on his chest, over his heart, and she said something short, and she nodded. She gave him leave. I have been in churches since. I have heard men with collars talk about courage and grace, and the laying down of the self. I have never in any of those churches been as close to whatever the holy thing actually is as I was in a one-cup cabin on the fourth morning, watching a dying woman put her hand on an old man's heart and give him leave to cut her leg off to save the rest of her, because she had decided, not us, never us, that she was not done living yet, and this was the toll, and she would pay it. I will not write down the doing of it. I held her shoulders. He'd boiled the knife and laid out the moss and the bindings and a strap of leather he'd worn soft for her to bite. I held her shoulders, and I looked at the wall at the third trap, the one apart from the others, and I counted its teeth over and over to keep myself in my body, and she made the strap-muffled sounds a person makes, and the mountain man worked fast and steady and wept the entire time without once letting it into his hands. His hands did not shake. I have thought about that a great deal. The fight in the yard, the fever watch, the cup, the bed, he shook through all of it. But when it was hers to ask and his to do, the old swollen hands went still as stone and stayed still until it was finished, and only then did he turn aside and put his back to us and let his shoulders go once, hard like a tree taking a wind, before he turned back and bound her up and began again the work of keeping her alive. She lived. That night her fever broke for true. By the 6th day she could hold the cup herself. By the 8th she was up on one elbow watching the door, and watching him with an attention that had something in it I was slow to name, being young. I named it the night I finally understood who they were to each other. I'll get there. But first the count has to balance, and to balance it I have to tell about the 9th night and the column. We knew they'd come back. We hadn't said it, but we knew. A lieutenant who won't falsify a count is a lieutenant who, somewhere down the road, lying in his bedroll, gets to itching about a Chiricahua he marked dead who he knows for a fact rode off up a mountain on a trapper's mule. Conscience and pride pull the same direction sometimes, and both of them point back up the hill. They came on the 9th night. Not the whole column, that was long gone east. She and her people loaded onto cattle cars by then, though we didn't know it yet. Just a detail. The sergeant, the one who'd cut her loose, and 4 troopers, sent back to settle the loose thread. Quiet men, doing a quiet, ugly errand, and you could tell from how they came up the trail in the dark, slow, no lanterns, fanning at the tree line, that the sergeant at least knew it was ugly and meant to get it over fast. It was the mules that warned us. The mountain man's mules went uneasy at the picket, and he was up off the floor where he slept with the unhurried speed of an old animal that has stayed alive a long time precisely by knowing the difference between a sound and a sound. He had the rifle. He looked out the one window into the dark, and he stood there reading it the way I'd read the dust 9 days before, and then he turned around, and the firelight was low, and his face had gone past empty into something settled, something I'd only seen the start of in the yard. He'd decided something. "Boy," he said, "there's a way out the back of the spring. Crack in the rock, goes down to the timber. A man could carry a woman through it slow in the dark and be a long way gone by light." I understood what he was telling me to do. I understood the other half of it, too, the half where one man stays at the cabin with the rifle, and the lamplight so the detail thinks both their birds are still in the nest, and buys, with whatever he's got to spend, the time it takes a boy and a woman to get a long way gone in the dark. I said, "No, you take her, you know the rock, you know her, You'll do as I say," not loud. He came across the cabin and he gripped my arm, and his grip was the grip of those 40 years of cold water hands, and it was not unkind and it was not negotiable. "I'm 70 years old and I've buried everyone I ever—" He stopped. The sentence had a cliff in it and he stepped back from the edge. "She knows you now. She'll go with you. And you can carry her and a rifle both, and I can't, not with the knee, not through that crack, not fast enough to matter. It's arithmetic, boy. You're so fond of your counting, count it." And God help me. I counted it, and it came out his way, and there is no day of my life I have not recounted it hoping it would come out different. Then Nan spoke. She'd been listening. She had more of the white tongue than she ever let the soldiers know. I'd worked that out by the 8th day, and she said, from the bed shelf in slow, careful English, "The the first English I ever heard her use. "No one stays." We both looked at her. "No one stays," she said again. She had pushed herself up. In the low light her face was fierce and gray and entirely certain, and she looked from the mountain man to me and back. And what was in her face was not fear, it was fury, the clean fury of someone who has watched too many people be left behind on too many trails and will not preside over one more. "I am the one they leave. Always I am the one. Not now, not him." She put her hand out toward the mountain man, palm up, demanding, "Through the rock, all of us, or none." "Nan," he started. "You take apart your bed for me." Her voice cracked and held. "You cut my leg, you give me your cup, and now you send the boy and you stay to die so the count is clean for the soldier." She shook her head, slow, terrible. "No, I carry it back. That is my name. I do not leave you to balance their book." The cabin was dead quiet. Outside, a boot found gravel. And I watched the mountain man, who had faced down 60 cavalry with empty hands, who had asked a boy to do murder's arithmetic without a tremor. I watched him be utterly defeated by one woman with one leg telling him she would not be saved at the price of him. His whole settled face came apart. 40 years of the number 1, and she just told him flat that the number was 3 or it was nothing, and there was no version of his solitary, stubborn soul that had a defense against being wanted that much. "All right," he said, barely a breath. "All right, the rock, all 3. We went out the back, into the spring's cold, into the crack in the rock that smelled of wet stone and old water, the mountain man first feeling the way, then Nan with her arm hard around my neck and her ruined leg held off the ground, then me carrying the most of her and the rifle both, just like he'd said I couldn't, but he was wrong. You can carry more than a man tells you can. You can carry almost anything if the one you're carrying has decided, the way she had decided, that everybody comes or nobody does." Behind us in the cabin we left lit and empty, the detail found the lamp burning and the bed shelf cooling and one cup, washed clean, set in the middle of the floor where they couldn't miss it. The mountain man set it there himself on the way out. I asked him later why. He said, so they'd know it wasn't a count they were settling. It was a home. I never fully understood it. I've never fully stopped thinking about it either. We were a long way gone by light. It was on the second night down in the timber, the 3 of us in a cold camp with no fire to give us away, Nan's head on my rolled coat and the mountain man sitting up against a deadfall with the rifle across his knees, that I finally learned who they were. I'd stopped expecting it, so when he started talking low into the dark, I almost missed the beginning. 40 years back, he said, I came into this country young and stupid as you, boy, and stupider, trapping the high creeks alone, which you don't do, only nobody told me. Got myself bad hurt, fell, broke this same knee the first time, miles from anybody, whether turning. I'd have died on that mountain. I'd made my peace to die on it. He was quiet a moment. A band found me, Chiricahua, wintering high. By every law of that hard time they should have left me. One more white fool freezing where his foolishness put him. And white fools were no friend to them, even then, even before the worst of it. They had every reason in the world to step over me and go on. He shifted the rifle. They didn't, an old woman wouldn't have it, made them carry me in, set the knee, wintered me through. I lived in that band the better part of 2 years, learned the tongue, learned the country, learned. He stopped and the cliff was there again, and this time he went up to the edge and looked over. Learned what people are when they don't have to be. That old woman that wouldn't leave me. Her name was Nanjud. She carries it back. I understood then, or started to. Nan's her granddaughter, he said. Carries the name. I held Nan when she was a baby, held her in this same arm 40 years ago, before I went back down to my own kind because a man's a coward and I told myself I didn't belong. His voice had gone to gravel. I've watched all these years from up my mountain, while my own people did to her people what they did. Couldn't stop a hair of it. Told myself it wasn't mine to stop, same as the old soldier told himself, same as that rancher, same as you behind your smokehouse, boy. We all of us tell ourselves it isn't ours. He looked over at her asleep, her hand even in sleep half reaching toward where he sat. And then they brought her up my own South Road, roped at the wrist, dying, he said. And I found out it had been mine the whole time. It had been mine for 40 years. I'd just been letting it sit like your nails, boy. Bent and straight, sorted in a can, doing nobody a particle of good. I did not write anything that night. The book stayed in my pocket. Some things you don't count. You just sit up in the cold with a rifle across the knees of a man who's finally telling the truth, and you keep watch and you let him. But I'm getting near the part where the book has to come back out. Because we were 3 people and 1 rifle in the timber with the army at our backs, and a whole country between us and any place that would have us. And the question of where on God's earth you take a dying then living Chiricahua woman and an old trapper turned traitor to his own kind, in the autumn of 1886, when the order was every Chiricahua, every one, that question we had not yet answered. On the 11th day, we decided to run for Mexico, which was the same as deciding to run for the moon, except the moon doesn't have soldiers on it. I want to be honest about the size of what we were attempting, because the temptation, telling it old, is to make it sound like a plan. It was not a plan. It was 3 people and 1 rifle and a mule too lame to ride and a woman who could not yet stand on her own, looking south across a country that wanted at least 2 of them dead or boxed, and choosing south because every other direction was worse. The mountain man knew the high routes, the dry camp passes that troopers hated and mostly avoided, and somewhere over the line was the Sierra Matter. And in the Sierra Matter, if the talk was true, were the last free Chiricahua, the ones who had not surrendered and had not been roped and shipped, holding out in country so cruel the army had given up reaching into it. If we get her to her people in the high Matter, the mountain man said, crouched over a patch of dirt he was drawing on with a stick, they're gone into rock no soldier follows. She's free. Maybe the last of 'em that ever will be. And us? I said. I meant it small. I meant. And then what becomes of an old white trapper and a young white ranch hand who helped a Chiricahua woman vanish into Mexico in the autumn of '86? He looked at me, and there was something almost gentle in it, and almost amused, and I should have read the whole rest of the story in that look, but I was 22 and I read nothing. You, he said, go home, quiet. You were splitting wood the whole while anybody asks. You never were here. He scuffed out the map with his boot. Me, I'm an old man going up a mountain, always have been, nothing to remark on in that. I didn't like the shape of the answer. I let it go anyway. You'll have noticed by now that letting things go was the great talent of my young life and the great shame of it, and I am not going to pretend the 11th day cured me. It didn't. It just showed me, finally, what it looked like when somebody didn't. 6 days south. She got stronger the way the dry country gets green after rain, suddenly, fiercely, out of all proportion to what you'd think the soil could hold. By the 3rd day below the cabin, the mountain man had made her a crutch from a forked oak limb, sanded smooth with a stone, padded at the fork with the last of the soft hide, and she took to it with a grim determination that turned, by the 4th day, into something close to mastery. She would not be carried unless the ground forbade walking. She set the pace from the front as often as not, swinging that crutch and her good leg in a rhythm she invented as she went. And when she fell plenty. The first days, she came up before either of us could reach her, every time with a look that dared us to have seen it. And the humor came back. That was the thing I hadn't known to hope for. As the body mended, the woman who'd breathed a laugh at 3 useless men in a dusty yard came back up out of the fever and the knife and the rope, and she was, it turned out, funny, dry, watchful, merciless. She named the lame mule a word in her tongue that the mountain man wouldn't translate, ducking his head, until she translated it herself, deadpan, into English, "Old man number 2." And even he laughed, the rusty, unused sound of it scaring a bird out of a juniper. She caught me writing in the book one evening and held out her hand for it, and I gave it over, and she couldn't read a word of it, of course, but she turned the little leather pages with great seriousness, frowning, nodding, and then handed it back and said, grave as a judge, very good. All the nails are there. And I laughed so hard I had to sit down, and it was the first time since the smokehouse that the knot in my chest came all the way loose. I wrote that night. She made a joke about the book. She is going to live a long time. I believed it when I wrote it. I want that on the record. For 6 days I let myself believe the story was going to come out clean. It is the believing that I've never quite forgiven myself for, because believing it was a way of not watching closely. And if I'd watched closely, I'd have seen what the mountain man was doing, which was saying his goodbyes. He did it small. He did it the way he did everything, without remark. He taught me things those 6 days that I didn't notice were being handed to me rather than just shown. How to read the dry passes, where the water hid, how to tell a cavalry track from a vaquero's, how to move 3 people through open country in the blue hour when the light lies. He gave me the rifle to carry on the 4th day and didn't take it back. He told me offhand where a man could trade hides honest in a Sonora town, and where a man would get his throat cut trying. He was loading me, is what he was doing. The way you load a mule you're about to send on a loan. I didn't see it. Nan saw it. I know now that Nan saw it from the first day below the cabin and said nothing, because she had already lost the argument once on the 9th night, and she was not a woman who lost the same argument twice by fighting it the same way. She was waiting for her ground. They caught our trail on the 6th day, within sight of the line. Not the sergeant's detail, a different patrol entirely. A dozen troopers swept up from some border post, doing the ordinary work of watching a border that everybody crossed and nobody admitted to. Bad luck, plain and simple. We came down out of a pass into a long open run of grama grass with the dry hills of Sonora shimmering not 3 miles off, 3 miles, and behind us and high a flash of glass caught the sun, a spyglass, a lookout, and then the thread of dust that I could read in my sleep by then started down the slope behind us, and there was no cover, and Nan could not run. She could move. She could not run. 3 miles of open grass against 12 mounted men and a crutch and a lame mule and 1 rifle. The mountain man stopped. He turned and looked back up at the dust, and then he looked at the 3 miles of open ground, and then he looked at me, and the arithmetic was done before he said a word of it. I'd gotten good enough at his arithmetic by then to do it myself, and I did it, and I felt the bottom go out of everything. No, I said. Boy. No, we did this on the 9th night. She said it on the 9th night. No one stays. On the 9th night, he said very quietly, very steadily, with the dust coming down the slope behind him. There was a back way out the rock and time and a chance for all 3. There isn't now. Now there's the line and one of us slow afoot and a dozen riders and somebody who can sit in this grass with a rifle and make 12 men come careful instead of fast. Make them think there's more of us. Make them spend the afternoon. An afternoon's all she needs to be over and into the rock. He was already pulling cartridges from his belt, counting them into his palm. He was counting, the careful old man, balancing his own last book. It's arithmetic. You taught me to respect it. Now respect it back. Behind him, Nan said, no. We both turned. And she was not furious this time. That was how I knew it was different. On the 9th night she'd been all fire. Now she stood square on her crutch in the grama grass with the wind moving the dry stems around her one good leg, and her face was calm, and calm was 1,000 times worse than the fire, and she looked at the mountain man with 40 years between them, the baby he'd held, the grandmother who wouldn't leave him, the whole long debt running both directions, and she said, not you, me. He started to shake his head. Listen. She did not raise her voice. You taught the boy the country. 6 days you teach him. He can take me the last 3 miles or he can take me nowhere. Without you he is lost in an hour and you know it. You made him need you and now you want to leave. No, she shifted her weight. I am the slow one. I am the one with 1 leg. I sit in the grass with the rifle. You and the boy go 3 miles you cross and I make the soldiers careful and I spend their afternoon the way you said, me. It is my book to balance. They have been taking me away my whole life. Let me one time be the one who stays." The wind hissed in the grass. The dust came on down the slope. I have turned the next part over more times than any other moment of my life, and I still do not fully understand how it broke the way it broke, except that two people who loved each other past all sense were each trying to die for the other in the same small patch of grass, and there was a third person standing there. The witness, the boy with the book. And the thing about a witness is that sometimes the count comes down to him whether he's ready or not. The mountain man looked at me, to make me agree with him, to make me take her and go and leave him. And Nan looked at me, to make me agree with her, to take him and go and leave her. And God forgive me, God forgive me. I have asked him to for 40 years, and I do not know if he has. I did the only thing my whole watching, counting, letting it go life had ever trained me to do. I told the truth about the numbers. "She's right," I said, and my voice broke clean across the middle of it. "Caleb, she's right. I can't find the line without you. I'll lose us both in the hills before dark. It has to be her." The mountain man closed his eyes. When he opened them, the fight had gone out of his whole body at once, the way it goes out of a thing that has been holding a great weight a long time and is finally allowed to set it down. He'd spent 40 years trying to be the one who stayed for her people, and the granddaughter of the woman who saved him had just taken even that away from him, had refused to the very last to let him buy her with himself, and there was no defense against it. There never had been, and we all three knew it. He went to her. He got down on the bad knee one more time there in the grass, and he put his forehead against her forehead, and he said something low in her tongue long, and she answered short, and he laughed wet, broken, but a laugh, at whatever she said back. And to this day I do not know what passed between them in those last words, and I have never wanted to, because some doors you don't knock on. I told you that at the start, and I meant it. Then he stood and he gave her the rifle, and he gave her his belt of cartridges, and he gave her last, the one thing I never saw him give anyone, which was his hand, flat, briefly, against the side of her face, the same gesture he'd made at the well 11 days and a lifetime ago. Closing the circle the only way left to close it. She caught his wrist before he could draw the hand back, held it there a second, said one word. Then she pushed it gently away and turned to face the slope, and the dust, and the dozen riders, and she lowered herself down into the grass where it grew tall enough to hide a kneeling woman, and she laid the rifle across a hummock, and she did not look back at us again. She would not give us that. A look back would have been a goodbye, and a goodbye would have been a chance to argue, and she was done arguing. She'd won the only argument she'd ever cared to win. The mountain man took my arm and turned me south, and we ran. I will tell you what I know, and not one thing more, because the not knowing is the truest part of the whole account, and I won't dress it up. We crossed. 2 miles 3, the line that isn't a line, just more grama grass and then a dry wash, and then we were, by the maps men draw, in Mexico, in country a U.S. patrol could not lawfully follow into and mostly didn't. We went up into the first hills as the light went long and gold, and I will not pretend I ran the whole way clean. Twice I tried to turn back, and twice the mountain man's hand was on my arm, and the second time he said, in a voice I'd never heard him use, a flat, dead voice, "You take that from her too. You go back and get caught and make her afternoon worth nothing. Run, boy. It's the only honest thing left we can do for her. Make her count come out right. Run." So I ran. And behind us, twice, 3 times, far off and flattened by distance, we heard the rifle, spaced out, careful, a shot and a long wait and a shot, exactly the way she'd said, making 12 men think there were more of us, making them come careful instead of fast, spending their afternoon. And then, somewhere up in the gold hills with the dark coming on, we stopped hearing it. I do not know what that means. I have spent 40 years not knowing what that means. It could mean she was out of cartridges and they took her alive, and what they did with one more Chiricahua I can guess and would rather not. It could mean she did the thing I think she had already decided to do back in the grass, with the last round, to keep them from being able to take her away even one final time. It could mean, and this is the version I let myself believe on the nights I need to sleep, that she'd done what she set out to do, bought the afternoon, and then slid back through the dry wash in the dark on her crutch and her one good leg. She carries it back, and made the line herself, and went up into the rock to her people, and is the grandmother now of children who tell a story about a stubborn woman and an old white man and a boy with a book, and do not need any of it to be true the way I need it. I don't know, the book doesn't know. There's a page where the count just stops. The mountain man and I made the matter. We found, after 8 days, sign of the free Chiricahua, and they found us first, which is the only reason we lived to know it. And there was a long, careful, dangerous parley in which the old man's 40-year-old tongue and his 40-year-old debt were the only things standing between us and a quick end, and at the finish of it they took him in. Wintered him, the way the grandmother had all those years gone. Closed that circle too. They did not take me. I was young and white and had a home to go back to, and there was no debt that ran my direction, and the old man knew it. And on the morning I left to make my way back north alone, he stood at the edge of the high camp and did not embrace me, because that was not his way. But he put his hand flat against the side of my face the way he had with her once, and held it there, and said, "You came down off your smokehouse, boy. Took you long enough." A pause, the ghost of the rusty laugh, "But you came down." I never saw him again. He'd be long dead now by simple arithmetic. He was 70 then, and this was 40 years ago, and even mountain men don't beat that count. I like to think he died up in the rock among the last free people, an old white man who finally belonged somewhere, who'd finally been the one who stayed. I don't know that either. There's a lot I don't know. The older I get, the more of the page is blank. Here is the thing I said I'd set down. The one word Nan said in the grass, when she caught his wrist and held his hand against her face that last second before she turned to face the slope. She didn't say it to him. She turned her head, just her eyes, just for a flash, the only look back she allowed herself in the whole of it. And she said it past his shoulder to me, the boy with the book, the witness, and the word was English, and the word was, "Remember." That's all, remember. And then she pushed his hand away and turned to the grass and was done with us. I have thought sometimes that she meant it small, remember me, the ordinary plea of anyone facing the dark. But I have come to think she meant it the way her name meant. She carries it back. A thing that was taken, and someone has to be the one who brings it home. She couldn't carry it herself anymore. She was about to spend the last of herself in a field of grass to buy 2 men an afternoon. So she handed it to the one person standing there whose whole strange, useless talent, whose one habit, whose single quirk, was carrying things forward without changing them. The boy who wrote it all down honest. The boy with the book. She made me her grandmother's name, with one word in a field 3 miles short of free. She made me the one who carries it back. It has taken me 40 years, and I am not sure I have carried it well. I let too much go in my life before and even after. I am not the man either of them was. I never managed the thing they did, the not stepping over, the staying. The most I ever managed was to watch, and to write it down true, and to hand it on. But that, it turns out, was the job she gave me. So here it is, carried back the best I could. Set down honest, the way the book taught me, with nothing dressed up and the blank parts left blank. There's a smear of something brown on the bottom of the page from that first morning, the 47 straight, 31 bent page. I've never scrubbed at it. I never will. Some things you don't clean off the count. I'm an old man. I've handed you the heavy thing. My back was never strong, but I carried it as far as I could, and now it's